Hi, I'm Case Spivey, and today I want to talk about The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci. Overall, I greatly enjoyed this book. It was violent, it was sexy, it was fast-paced and really exciting. I highly recommend it, but this is not a review. For today's video, I'm going to be spoiling a lot of important parts of this book, so if you haven't read it yet, just click away, it's fine. But if you have read The Savior's Champion, today what I want to talk about is one specific element of it that I felt Jenna did very well, and that was foreshadowing. Personally, I figured out the big twist in the book pretty early on, definitely before the halfway point, but I think it's because I was paying attention and the clues were definitely there. The foreshadowing was really, really well done. One of the most important things about foreshadowing is that you leave enough breadcrumbs for the reader to follow and feel like they're solving a mystery, but not enough that your main character notices those breadcrumbs. And Tobias at no point noticed. He did not figure out the big plot twist until the end, and so it was okay if the reader didn't. But I did. So I want to talk about some of these things. I'm going to start small. There were a lot of little things that she also alluded to, and one of the big ones, because they became my OTP really, really quickly, was Enzo and Xander being together. She alluded to that pretty early on. Now when we first meet Xander, he's already kind of a sweetheart, and so when he's standing up for Enzo, that doesn't clue you in necessarily right away. However, there is another scene that I have marked in chapter 8 where Enzo and Xander slip off together. Maybe I'm just a big fangirl, but I immediately was like, oh man, those two are definitely fucking. And they were! Now obviously I was devastated. My one thing, Jenna Moreci, if you for some reason stumble across this video and you happen to be watching it, the only thing I ask for the next book is please, 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 if we meet Enzo again, please don't let him be with somebody else. I just shipped them so hard and fast and I just want him to mourn. I don't care if he ends up with someone like way late, but when we see him again, I just want him to not have found somebody yet. I want him to still be sad about Xander. Maybe that's selfish. It's my one request. I don't know why. They didn't even have that much time in the book. Xander's barely in this, and Enzo has one big moment where he reveals everything, but I was just, when I finished the book, they were the one thing that I was like still thinking about was, I loved that so much. But okay, I'm done with my fangirling. Time to get to the meat of the whole thing. Obviously, that is big spoiler. If you haven't clicked away yet, do so right now. And that is that Layla is the savior. What are you doing? Come here. Oh, Pi didn't know. Pi didn't see this coming. What are you doing? You're just running around like a crazy guy. Yeah? You just got the heebie-jeebies? You just gotta go do stuff? Alright. So from the very beginning, we're given just a couple of traits about the savior. One is that she glows with an inner light while she's out in the sun. And two is that the legend of her involves healing. Now this is your first big clue in the book, is that she's meant to be a healing presence. Now obviously, when we're first introduced to the savior, the person that we meet is Cosima. When it comes to Cosima, there are two main things that seemed off to me about her. One is how careful Tobias is to notice and how careful she is to make sure that she is never in the sun. You don't notice the same thing with Layla, even though she only ever meets him in the dark or underground, or out of sunlight or underground. Cosima brings it up and Tobias notices it. She's always back in the shade. She's always hidden away from the sun in some way. When they're getting the tour of the palace, the windows are darkened and she mentions it. She mentions it constantly that her skin isn't glowing because the sunlight is not on her. Because it was brought to our attention so much with her, that made me suspicious. Got a writer's mind. I had to be like, something fishy going on here. My next huge clue was that the first time Tobias gets to spend time alone with her, he feels nothing. And that was a big hint to me. If the savior is as powerful as we have been told she is up until that point, I know as the reader that something is going wrong here, that Cosima is not who she says she is. And of course I mentioned the healing. Of course Layla came down and is the healer. And I think it's very interesting that no one even suspects anything of her. And I love that. That's very well done. Although another really good hint that's just trickled throughout is the way that Delphi speaks of Layla. She speaks of her in a protective way and in a sisterly way, and she does not have the same language that she uses for Cosima. Also, later on then, and the way people speak about each other I think is very well done in this book. The characters all know exactly what they know, and it comes across in the writing. That's very important, especially for foreshadowing. The characters need to know more than the main character does, if that makes sense. People who are in on the plot need to know that they're in on the plot, and not necessarily actively be hiding things at all times. Specifically that Delphi is protective of Layla, and specifically that she found the drawings Tobias did and liked them enough and didn't bring up to him, didn't tell off Tobias for drawing them. And that was a big sign to me that Cosima is not that important to her. And if Cosima was really the savior, you would think she would hold more importance. The story is very good at throwing you off of that she's kind of a bitch, and Layla is very sweet and very loving, especially towards Delphi, that they care a lot about each other. But I was tipped off by that. We always see him with Cosima before something happens, but not every single time. But every single time, wherever the handprints are on him when he's been in her favor, it's exactly where he was touched by Layla. That was the... I knew. Right before the big battle with Antaeus, when she smeared the cream on him, I was like, that's interesting. How could she have gotten that from the savior? Does the savior just give that to them? And then I thought about it for a little bit and I was like, I feel like Layla's the savior, especially because the sovereign was extremely upset about it and said that he had somehow gained the savior's favor. Now, if the savior could give out her gifts in the forms of like creams and ointments and things, it wouldn't have been as weird for Tobias to have received her favor. So they would have suspected somebody else, something else would have happened, but he knew, the sovereign knew for sure that he had gained the savior's favor. And so at that point I was very confident after the battle with Antaeus that Layla was the savior. I'm just saying, but it doesn't come up. It doesn't come up until the very, very end of the book, which is brilliant, because even though I was so sure that I knew that this was the way the story was going, it's very well paced in that there's always something to trip you up. Cosima has always had her hands on him a little bit at some point, even though the marks are definitely exactly where he was touched by Layla. And just that tiny bit of doubt makes the foreshadowing so good, especially because Tobias does not expect, and especially because you have characters like Flynn always throwing them off, always coming back to Cosima. It's so brilliant. And because he thinks of her as Cosima as the savior, you have the capitalized pronouns for her throughout the book. And so you're always being distracted, and when the big reveal comes at the end, it's more like a "ha, I knew it" moment rather than a like, "oh, how could this have been?" And I think that that's really important. It's important in foreshadowing something that it doesn't come out of the blue for the reader. Having a big twist is great, but not when it feels like it could be a Deus Ex Machina thing. We need to have that little bit of foreshadowing, that little bit of, it's probably Layla, even though you keep being distracted and going back to, it's gotta be Cosima because everyone's saying so. You need that so that we don't get to the end and go, oh, it's Layla just because she's in love with Tobias, which I didn't have that feeling at all. I was psyched about the big reveal at the end, and that's so, so important. I realized I should put the book back over here now. I specifically wanted to talk about foreshadowing with the Savior's Champion because I thought it was so well done, and I really wanted to support Jenna Moreci because I love her videos. If you have been stuck in some corner of the internet and haven't watched Jenna Moreci's videos on writing, definitely go check her out. I will link that channel down below, and definitely check out the Savior's Champion if you're interested in dark adult fantasy. If you don't mind a little blood, you don't mind a little bro talk, I guess is what you'd call it. It definitely felt like a bunch of frat boys hanging out a lot of the time. There was a very strong feeling of that. I don't know why I'm selling it to you. I already told you you should have read the book before you watched this, because I just gave away the most important two things, which was Enzo and Xander are OTP forever, and Layla's the savior. There's other good foreshadowing things throughout. I just felt like those two are very strong. They're very obvious, and it was a good way to talk about how foreshadowing can work and how you just trickle it in throughout the book. I thought it was done so well. And of course, it was necessary. It was so necessary to have the foreshadowing in place, because without it, it could have been a disappointment at the end, but it wasn't. It was a huge payoff, and it was well worth it, and I really enjoyed this book. Click the like down below if you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe. And I will see you again soon. Bye!